This is the piece of wood I will be refurbishing to create this piece. Previously, this wood has been stained using a dark varnish, so my first course of action will be to sand away this varnish to create a blank slate to work off. Sanding the wood will also remove some of the minor imperfections and scratches in the wood. So as I said, I first began by sanding this piece of timber down. I started by using my belt sander with a pretty harsh grit. This is because the timber was looking in pretty bad condition and I really wanted to remove all the imperfections and make it look nice and clean. When I was sanding, there was a couple things that I needed to look out for. The machinery that I used created a lot of dust, so I made sure to be wearing a mask and safety glasses throughout the whole process. I also mistakenly didn't clamp down the wood properly at first. This caused the wood to slide around, which could be dangerous if left unchecked. So if you're trying this at home, make sure your timber is properly secure and wear all the appropriate protective gear. Another thing I should mention is that although I use a lot of automated equipment when making this product, almost all of it can be done by hand. Although it would take longer sanding by hand, it will also create the same look and feel as I get. After all the sanding was complete, I then moved on to sketching out the river line that I would be following. To get a bit of inspiration, I first did some freehand movements drawing on my laptop. This helped me to get a bit of a feel for how I wanted my river to look. After doing some sketches, I then moved on to drawing on the wood itself. I kept to using a very loose and freehand style to give the river a nice flow. I made a lot of mistakes on mine, so don't be afraid if you mess it up, just grab a rubber or some sandpaper to get rid of your mistake. Then I moved on to carving into the timber. The machine that I used is called a router. This is a pretty old model, but you can find some newer ones for pretty cheap online. You can also use a sharp wood carving knife to dig through the timber to create your river shape. As I had only used this machine once before, I started on some scrap timber. This made me more comfortable to use it on the actual product. This is something that I definitely recommend doing with all your tools that you aren't comfortable with. There's nothing worse than having to start over due to a small mistake that could have been prevented. Now I moved on to actually putting the colour into the river. This was definitely the hardest and messiest part of the process. I first began by cutting up some crayons into chunks and placing them along the river. After this was done, I decided to use a hairdryer to melt the crayons. I quickly realised that this strategy would not work as the crayons do not stay put and just blow away from you. My best idea was to use a soldering iron to melt the crayons. Although it worked, this was not a great idea. This made the process extremely messy and generated some toxic fumes that still linger in my shed to this day. After the crayons were melted, I moved on to sanding the tops of the crayons to keep the artwork flat for the upcoming clear coat. This is where I made a long series of mistakes. I first ruined all my sandpaper with the colour that infused into the grain. I then later used the coloured sandpaper on the wood itself, turning the wood blue. However, I then used a cleaning detergent to remove the colour from the wood, but because the crayon wasn't fully dry yet, the liquid fused with the crayon and stained the wood even further. I helped this issue by getting fresh sandpaper and sanding away the colour, although I did my best to sand away the colour, a little of it was still visible. This is where I decided to cave in and stain the wood a darker colour. Although I really wanted to keep the original light colour, I knew that it would remove the horrible coloured tint. Luckily, this worked perfectly and covered any hint of the previous colour. After I let this dry, I used a thick acrylic clear coat to seal and protect the timber from wear and tear, and the product was finished. Now that I'm all done, I'm feeling pretty happy with the final product. I definitely think that there's a couple of things that I might improve on if I was to ever do this again. And you know, if you guys are doing that at home, then I'd say definitely don't try and sand away at the crayon. Like, it doesn't really work very well. Kind of gives us a bit of a rough texture. And as I said, it ruins your sandpaper and ruins the rest of your job. So what I would recommend is when you're using your heat gun or whatever, just try and smoothen it out as much as possible and make sure that there's no lumps sticking up above the wood level. Other than that, I would make sure to definitely take it a bit slower than I did. I tried to rush the whole kind of process to get this video out. So I didn't wait until the crayons were completely dry to put on the clear coat, which is why it spread so much around. So if you do try this at all, just wait for the crayons to completely dry. Probably take about 24 hours for them to completely dry and harden into the wood before you try and make any other changes on it. Now, this was actually a recreation on something that I did do a while back, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I made a similar kind of artwork on a smaller piece of timber, but I used a thick gouache paint to actually fill the crack in the wood. This turned out pretty well. It's pretty vibrant and nice, but I didn't get any color variations, and it actually took 2 months to dry just because of how like thick and wet the paint was. So it was definitely easier to do it with crayons. It was a bit quicker. But yeah, it's definitely something that I've always been very interested in, like ingraining color into wood, like the whole concept around it. Whether or not I'll make more videos of it in the future, but I definitely want to try out new things like that. I've got a couple ideas that I might try out on new pieces of wood. But yeah, it was really cool to make my own artwork custom designed for my room. Like, I was looking online and a lot of the things weren't quite the right size or exact fit to like what I wanted. So being able to like measure out the timber and knowing where I want to put it and how I want it to look was really cool. And just making myself, like, knowing that I put a lot of hard work and effort into it is definitely a lot nicer than buying some cheap artwork display online. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is the first time I've ever tried like a DIY type video, so it's pretty fun to actually do a full new process on it. But yeah, let me know if you guys enjoy that. I'm sorry this video was late again. It feels like I'm saying this every video now. I was up on a holiday in Brisbane with my family, which is why I didn't have time to record any of this stuff. But yeah, it was good to spend some time over Christmas and New Year's with my family. But yeah, I hope you guys had a good Christmas and New Year's, and I'll see you in the next video.